Hello and welcome to the Kuyumunga Institute, our Q&A conversation for exploration series. I'm Paul Revere, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach, and of course, on behalf of our Board of Directors, advisors, volunteers, and supporting members, we do want to thank you for joining us today. The Kuyumunga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist, Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of that deeper human connection to all of life. It is part of our mission to expand our own experiential research with the multidisciplinary understanding that's available to us today. So, as an educational institution, we take an open approach. We invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration, and that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. And these weekly discussions are available on demand. We have a couple hundred presentations between webcasts and podcasts. All of our presentations are free. And as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member. And we want to thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Kuyumunga Institute. Today, let's talk about alchemy. When we hear the term alchemy, the basic idea most of us are familiar with is the idea of turning base metals into gold. But as we go deeper, we find its relationship to myth, to metaphor, and personal awakening to be profound. As we look closer, we find the philosopher's stone as a central symbol in alchemy. It represents that ultimate goal of going beyond transforming base metals to gold, to granting immortality. And metaphorically, we're talking about how it can be seen as a symbol of personal enlightenment and transformation. And take it further, alchemy can provide us with a framework for understanding our own personal awakening and growth, and can be seen as a symbol of personal enlightenment and transformation. So today, we're excited to look at the mystical and symbolic nature of alchemy, and I feel it will inspire all of us as we continue our journey of finding that intersection of science, of spirituality, and personal development.
Well, indeed, I'm wondering, who were the alchemists of old and who are they now? I'm quite sure there are people around the planet trying to turn lead into gold and conducting those experiments. But what is the scope of this transformative and regenerative processes that work its magic? There's this metaphorical and mythical, yes, but there's the history to this and a relationship to chemistry, its namesake. Our guide today has made a deep study of the widespread imprint on philosophy, science, technology, and culture. Quite the enduring role of an ancient branch of natural philosophy, what he describes as a philosophical and a proto-scientific tradition of old. An art, really, that was handed down through the centuries from Egypt to Arabia, Greece, and Rome, and finally, to Western and Central Europe. The word itself, and yes, it does give rise to the word chemistry, stems from the Egyptian hieroglyph referring to the primordial ooze, the first matter, the chem, very fitting. Farzad Mahootian has a PhD in philosophy and a master's of science in chemistry, so well equipped to explore alchemy. He's taught philosophy, science, and humanities courses for over 30 years. And since 2010 is clinical associate professor of global liberal studies at New York University. He spent a decade prior to that as contractor with NASA's education division during the transition of the world to the World Wide Web. And for the last 3 years, he served on the board of trustees of the Christine Mann Library of the C.E. Jung Institute of New York City. He explores the relevance of myth and metaphor as the meeting point between philosophy and science and technology and society. His research projects include philosophy and psychedelics, digital humanities, and the history of alchemy, which he'll address today. Welcome, Farzad. Good to have you here.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. Thank you for that warm welcome.
Well, what an interesting career you've had. And boy, you've put your fingers into a lot of books, as we say. So how did you begin? What is this? Why chemistry? Why the humanities? What is your quest
that
in
intersection?
Life? What are the questions you most want to answer in life? And how does this serve you?
Big questions.
Yeah, huge. So I guess the beginning was when I was like, I'd probably 8 years old, and transistors were a new thing, and my dad was doing nuclear engineering research. I was really intrigued by the whole idea that one small thing could change everything. He was putting together an amplifier. It was one of those kits you could buy those days in the 60s that you kind of assemble a stereo and an amplifier. And it was all these tubes, and they're beautiful. They're beautiful objects of the past. They look like upside down test tubes with lights and things inside of them. And I was really intrigued by all that. But then when transistors came along, all of those beautiful tubes and their really big, hot items that they are just disappeared. And the entire globe switched over to this sort of miniature model. It was a transformation of such magnitude in such a short amount of time that that really captured my imagination. And I thought, if there's any way that I could do that, invent something that would alter the world so quickly, not just in a lifetime, but, within years, I'd be really happy with that. So that's what kind of started me off looking.
Transformative processes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Seen in society. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, I don't know, I was born in Iran. So I left there when I was 4, went back when I was 10 or 11, and then came back when I was 15, back and forth, learning and relearning languages. And that kind of shuffled parts of my brain so that I think on more than one channel. I had to do that just to survive as a 4-year-old, then as a 10-year-old, then as a 15-year-old. And so it's made it so that I don't quite stick and land on something and my interests in different things. I can't help but see things in a couple of different ways simultaneously. And so that kind of was formative as well for me. And really, it was, I was going to say, the reason I brought up Iran was not my upbringing, although that's, I guess, relevant, was that I was always interested in fire. I mean, the Zoroastrian background.
Oh, boy, isn't right?
But
yeah, exactly. It's something that, fire is magic. So.
Well, at the test tube level, it's what's heating up the test tube to make the chemical reactions happen, right?
Yeah. Well, nothing's the same after it touches fire. And so it is kind of like the symbol, the very...
Think of it in our cells, generating that heat to keep us going, right? It's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So these kind of things intrigued me. I got a chemistry set. Actually, my dad brought some chemicals home from the university. So I was playing with acids and metals, which I probably shouldn't have been at a young age. That stuck with me, and I went into chemistry to become a doctor. Changed my mind. I went to philosophy, and that's where the mix started to happen. And I became aware of alchemy as part of the history of chemistry. I mean, I loved chemistry. I felt really easily connected to it, but the alchemy, the pictures, the story, the concepts, just I couldn't put it together. It was a mystery, and it remains that way many decades later. It's only in the last couple of years since COVID that I thought, okay, this is it. I got to get serious and actually look at it. It's been a source of inspiration. It's kind of shifted the way I think of things, but to actually study it dead on and completely, I haven't done until a few years ago. And I've browsed different alchemy books. Here's a good one, which is amazing. It's a fat picture book, as you can see, with a little bit of text. I'll share a list of other books as we go, but this sort of browsing and perusing in a nonlinear way through all of these things, I finally decided to get serious and look at it, and look at it in in the broadest possible way. So during COVID, I thought, what can I do that's going to be worth time? And I think it was a beautiful sort of a cauldron for all of us. We were in there in that alchemical vase, kind of sealed in hermetically.
Lends itself so well to those metaphors, does it not?
Yeah, I should say also my interest in metaphor will kind of contaminate or actually enhance whatever I'm going to say, because the alchemical metaphors and chemical metaphors pervade normal language in ways that we're kind of unconscious of. And they pervade it in a significant way. It's not just sort of a nice turn of phrase, it goes deep. Anyway, so we're caught in this cauldron, which means things are going to happen. And people start to reflect. There's the circulation within the cauldron as if we're distilling something. It evaporates, it comes back down, and goes around and around. And so as I was doing this in my mind, I thought, what's worth doing? What is worth the time? How much time is there for me to spend on anything? What's really worth doing? And
that you didn't have time to do before, it sounds like, in your busy career. So
that too. And then I really took the scope of, what's left, how much can a person do in a few decades left, And
how can you change the world?
Yeah, basically back to my 8-year-old question of, what can transform? And so as an academic, which is not sort of, if you'd asked me when I was 18 or 19 or 20 or 21, 22, up through, my 30s, what do you want to do? Being an academic, being a chemistry, philosophy professor was not on the list at all, but here I am. So as an academic, what could I do? And I thought, people talk about alchemy. It's very hard to understand, but really all I've seen is just European alchemy. And I know it's well known, the history of alchemy is that a lot of the transition of knowledge that had been collated during the Islamic Golden Age moved up into Europe in the early 10th, 12th century. And really by the 14th, 15th century, things just exploded and, really new innovations were given birth to in the Renaissance. And so, but the source is there. So I thought, all right, so let's go back and look at that. And lo and behold, very little of it is translated. And then you look a little bit further and go like, India has this vast amount of alchemical text, not to mention all the inventions, all the work that they've done in that, whether it's plant alchemy or metallurgy and other substances. Then you go further east and you go China and you go like, oh my God, that's the largest collection of botanical knowledge and medicinal herbs in the world, all of it ancient. And yeah, they too have alchemy. And again, not a lot of that's translated. And so I thought, we talk about alchemy, we don't really know what we have. It would be great if we could in some way bring all of this to the surface, get it to a place where we can understand what it is. And the statements we make about it, let's put some evidence behind that. So I thought it would be great if artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques could find a way to go through any digitized archive in any language and just at least do some preliminary probing without translating, because many of these machine learning techniques are language independent. And so, or language agnostic, I guess is how they put it. So if we could do all of that, maybe we could inspire, because it's a huge labor intensive job to translate these things. Maybe it would inspire these cultures, having seen what they have sort of in this broad brush way, with the machine learning results, sorting out the material versus the spiritual alchemy and what kinds of materials, and to whatever extent it could classify without full translation. Maybe would it, national pride would kick in these places would then put, I don't know, a 100th of their military budget into this translation project.
Oh, if they think there's some payoff or benefit, for sure. I was actually thinking, what would the alchemists of old, if they could just drop in today and look around, wouldn't they be amazing? We're smashing atoms, right? We're looking and tearing apart. What is the primordial ooze of which we actually made? I mean, look at what we've done with the pharmaceuticals and the technology and the chemical and all the toxins we have in our environment. They'd be dismayed a bit, I think, too.
Yeah.
What do you think they would look around at us? Oh, is this what we gave birth to? Is this the end result? I'm wondering.
all your
I
fault.
think so. I think it would be very, very much like that. Um, you bring up the point I want to emphasize in your introductions. Both of you indicated there's a lot going on in alchemy, and the turning lead to gold thing, definitely there. It's connected to metallurgy, and it goes back to taming fire and putting fire to earth and purifying metals, and that whole process of
even combining metals, the very first to do it, that was
exactly.
magical.
Oh, the
And
Bronze Age,
what those metals
alloy.
do,
Yeah.
it transforms
Exactly.
society. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh my God, huge shifts on what we call the Bronze Age is definitely exactly what you said about creating an alloy out of two metals and so on. And so
Or even putting fire to clay and the technology there, right?
exactly.
Simpler,
I mean,
but
so
transformative.
much. And you know, you go on from clay to glazes, and again, you're back with the metals because glazes are metals and they turn glassy. And boy, the tiles on mosques in the Middle East. Oh my God, those things are
Gorgeous.
hundreds of years, almost a 1,000 years old, and they shine like it was yesterday, the same beautiful turquoise color. So there's a lot there in terms of knowledge that's been baked in, literally, in the kiln, on the fire.
Oh, you're good with those metaphors. Yeah.
They're not going to stop. That's just one part of alchemy, is putting fire to earth to get that. But then there is the other aspect of alchemy, which is looking at a plant, really any substance, not just the earth. So plants, animals, and understanding how these things suitably combined and changed and everything could act as medicine or hair color or makeup or soap. So a lot of alchemy has to do with meeting these household needs. And they have nothing to do with gold and lead at all. But they have everything to do with everyday life and home economics and economics at large. So that whole side of alchemy as this, just what do you do with stuff and how do you make life better with stuff, is a part of alchemy that has less to do with all of that really esoteric stuff, and it's very down home concrete stuff. Then you got that third aspect of it, that when you go beyond human needs and health, which is blended into the whole medical aspect of plants and so forth, then you have the spiritual side, which is how can we transform ourselves, and for all the substances that we use and put into our bodies and put on ourselves and everything, there is an understanding that a lot of this, a lot of the health that we experience comes really from ourselves. And it's our response to, it's our reaction to, it's our idea, it's our wish, it's our intention. These things I learned more and more. For example, in the postures that you do every week, I got the very, very sort of immediate sense that it takes very, very little, just a tiny suggestion to launch off into a whole set of feelings and experiences, so briefly and so subtly, but they just come on sort of almost for the asking. And in a sense that it gives me the idea that there's a lot more going on in me that could be triggered and drawn out
and transformed.
Transformed exactly by little triggers. Well, people like yourselves, objects, art, beautiful things around me. Just the memory of something would be enough to trigger. So that whole sense of the interior world as being really full of everything, which is what mystics and religious people realized from millennia.
So we're going from better living through chemistry to better living through transformation of self and soul, right? That's where it's really at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is that realization. And you could
full circle back to the ancient philosophy.
Exactly. Well, I was going to say, is it early? Is it late? When do you realize this? It goes
just always there. Yeah.
Exactly. So then we have this thing that really, is it spiritual? Is it material? It's this oscillation between the two. It's the one informing the other. And in that exchange, both of them are changed. And there you have sort of the essence of alchemical thinking or conception. It's the two, any two, but especially intensely opposites brought together and married. That is what alchemy does.
Oh, I love
and in
that.
the process of bringing them together, a transformation happens. What those two are doesn't really matter. It's a form of, it's the structure of the thinking or the reality that does that. So all alchemical images, and that's at the bottom of them, the sacred marriage, the bringing together of opposites. That's the whole thing.
You know, this kind of brings me back to Tyler Volk, which is how we met you, and his lovely talk on the growing complexity that the universe itself is driving this complexity of marrying opposites and then these new relationships. So his cosmogenesis idea. So we're right back to the structure. It's built into the universe, isn't it? It's how life unfolds, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just such a beautiful, magical mystery tour, right? As they say. Yeah. And it's it's all here. It's life.
Yeah, it's all there. Yeah, there's the sun, there's day, there's night, there's all kinds of opposites. But once you
drivers within it. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the fire.
Exactly. And once you see it on the inside, you start finding it on the outside, and that dance between inside and outside becomes the source of all this. Now, I bring you up to date with
please do. Yeah.
With my my own research on this using machine learning and stuff. And I just, when I got serious, I thought I'll write a little grant and I'll have some time to look into it. Okay, that was great. I got it. It's tiny, but it allowed me to travel and talk to a lot of people. Oh, and what I found from putting a lot more time into the study is the actual history of science, the academic version of the history of alchemy, has a conflict with the popular idea of the history of alchemy.
I see.
The conflict is interesting. And exactly, you get this kind of thing going on at this other level. And I'll tell it to you briefly. It's basically the crystallization of alchemy into spiritual alchemy, into material alchemy, the lab stuff, and then the inner stuff. That binary, which is not really a binary, is part of standard scholarship into the history of alchemy. And what's happened in the last 25 years, which is really wonderful, is that a number of scholars have taken to digging up the notes of Isaac Newton, for example.
I was going to say he was one of the early alchemists.
Oh my God, yes. And so he has lots of lab notes.
Wow.
And William R. Newman at Indiana just published, like maybe in 2019, the definitive sort of work on all of this. Having studied all of it, what he has is he's recreated some of the experiments and so forth. And he and Lawrence Principi and a couple of other people are the sort of the foremost proponents of this. Let's look at the history of alchemy, and we can drive back the history of chemistry and see that it started earlier. They're doing that. But at the same time, there is this issue that the spiritual alchemy is kind of either a disguise that they put on in order that, you know, for intellectual property protection or for protection from various social, religious currents, or. But in any case, it's a small part, and it's not what most of the literature is. And let's stop, basically, let's stop taking Carl Jung's interpretation and other people who do that as the, you know, core part of how we should think about alchemy. And this is a little bit, you know, I kind of go like, well, I mean, I love what they're doing, but I don't know about splitting these up that far. There's a problem because, you know, a lot of these people, like you're mentioning, Isaac Newton's doing the optics, the physics, all of this great groundbreaking stuff, really at the exact same time that he's doing this alchemy.
It's all about looking at God's handiwork to celebrate the creator, right? For Newton.
Yeah, that's exactly what he said. So the separation between those two, that bears a lot more scrutiny. And so that became...
Let's not just put it out to the side. It was core for these early alchemists.
And I think it is for alchemy in general. And like we were saying before, when you're doing one, whether you know it or not, you're doing the other. The whole concept of projection is that you're putting onto the world something that is
seeing it through our modern lens, right? Where we've divorced all of that and split them. We split the atom. Why not this philosophy?
Yeah, Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny that we think of projection as psychological, but then when it comes to scientific work, we think that psychology, that's not really happening there. It's objective knowledge.
Right.
We essentially go blind and continue to do the projection without being able to see it and then harvest it and then understand it in a bigger way.
Or let those original alchemists speak for themselves, right?
Yeah. Well, that's okay. So
they've taken Newton, they say, we don't like your astrology, we don't like your alchemy, we just like your physics. So this is, oh, poor man.
Oh my God, they hid that stuff for so long. It was scandalous. No one wanted to make it public, and then it, of course, pops out.
Such a genius, but a little delusional, right? So let's look at him as a whole, right? We're back to holistic perspectives.
Yeah, that's what we want to do, and I think it'll be for the benefit of science,
all of us,
and technology, and alchemy. So to jump back to your idea of regeneration, the theme of regeneration that you brought up, we have a lot of science and technology, and it has sort of spread throughout the world. We have millions of compounds that we invented, or possible reactions that we don't even know. I think the count is either 60,000 or 300,000 new compounds. But then when you consider all the possible combinations that reactions they could have, you're up into the millions. None of this is well known or really known at all. We're just beginning to catalog.
Or let's just combine as nature would do and see what happens and put it out there. Nature has a rule set. We don't. We're breaking the rules. And I'm just wondering what the implications truly are for all of that. We're irrevocably changing our biological codes.
Yes. We've done that irrevocably, and it's out there. And a lot of it is coming back in toxic ways that the climate change certainly is one thing, but pollution is another. And so if we continue like this, accelerating, it's kind of worrisome, as people have pointed out for at least the last 50 or 60 years.
A little worrisome.
Is there a way to think about science differently? And I think that's where alchemy comes back again, has something to offer as a mode of thinking. Maybe also in the actual discoveries or inventions that were made a long time ago, but certainly in just how do you think as a whole about the earth? It's very good at that. And it's sort of a different research attitude.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to bring up the work of Louis Kervran, a French scientist of a few decades ago. And we had a whole interview with him with a good friend. I'm going to ask him back, but that was nature working her alchemy in cold, normal temperatures, and a lot going on that we don't even recognize, right? I'll just park it there and to be discussed further. But I just want to acknowledge nature is probably the ultimate alchemist.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, the whole earth can be seen as one big alembic flask, and it's inside of that everything's occurring. Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, who say the earth is the primary teacher. It is the knowledge. It's not like a thing with knowledge. It is both. And to be able to think with and along with and act along with the earth is really the goal. And we've divorced that kind of knowledge from the know-how part, which sort of takes off on its own. But that part is the origin of it, and we've left that behind as part of the history. Even though it could be, it's here now. It's always here.
Yeah. You have a slideshow. Why don't you take us through that?
Before we go there, I just had one final hitting reverse for a moment, and coming back to the application of AI and how you're using it now as a scholar and researcher, because AI is changing the entire playing field of how things are accomplished, and the amount of time it takes for a specific project to be accomplished all of a sudden is being condensed into a very small amount of time. But there's also the trustworthiness of a whole thing and what's going on. There's good and bad to the whole thing, but the application is so intense and what can happen. And I know you made just a brief mention of it, but I would like to know a little bit more about how you're applying it, or how you see it at least being an application that can make your work speed forward, that you can jump forward without you trying to accomplish.
It's a weird thing. I think it's a dialogue. If you've used ChatGPT, you know that there is a back and forth. There's concerns about AI. I'll just leave it at that.
Right.
That it may take over, that it's a different mind, that it can kill us, and all these things. A little apocalyptic thinking goes a long, long way, apparently. But anyway, what it is that it is another mirror. I mean, science, everything's is a potential mirror.
Thank you.
Us,
yeah.
Right. And so, thank you. This remarkable, rapidly developing technology is in the form of this dialogue partner. So that two-ness, we consider it as an opposite that will kill us, right? But it's still another thing that we can try to, and that's when in the dialogue, people start to merge. This is old Platonic philosophy that, all the best things come out of dialogue, not from a textbook. But here it is, the dialogue I'm having with this ChatGPT thing. And weird things happen because it depends, it keeps throwing yourself back onto yourself, and it surprises you, and you wonder.
Hall of mirrors, yeah.
Exactly, you get lost in the hall of mirrors. Right, anyway, so what I'm doing with it is just a little bit of playing around with ChatGPT. I've started to do that. I have to teach it to my students. By the time they graduate, it'll be like, 10 iterations different. So they better get onto it now. So it's part of their required assignment now. But when I use it, I don't use ChatGPT for research of this type because it does mysterious things. The other weird sort of quasi-religious aspects of it here, or the mystical aspect of ChatGPT, is that the people who made it don't know how it works. It's not explainable. They want to explain it. They'd like to know, but they're surprised by what it presents. It doesn't mean that it's thinking or conscious, I don't think. It doesn't understand what it's doing. But nevertheless, it's giving rise to novelty in ways that we don't understand. Right. So that aside, what using machine learning and AI does if you go at it manually with the help of programmers, which is what I'm doing, is that you can kind of alter the knobs and dials, and then you can ask questions and modify your question, and then see how your modification gave a different result. And you can kind of go in there with less mystery and a lot more deliberation. And so I'm doing that in a way to understand how well AI, machine learning, can make its way through the tangled web of metaphors, of puzzles, of deliberate polysemy that they throw in there poetically, and accidental and stuff that's purely of the period for the 15th century but doesn't translate to the 18th century. These kind of things, can machine learning do that? Can it recognize genres, separate them, put them back together? Can it do the thing that alchemical stages profess, separation and coagulation, which are part of the steps of alchemy, the classical steps of alchemy? That's what we're asking it to do. And so that's how I'm doing. It's very kind of slow because I don't know how to program, but you have to get friends when you do research of this kind. And so it's been great to meet new people that way.
The alchemy of AI. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, let's take a look at some of your imagery as we go through your presentation.
Give us a little historical lesson here. Bring us up to speed on the alchemists of old.
Okay. And I have great trepidation doing this for any number of reasons. One, no image can do this properly. Two, I wish I had another couple of weeks to do this.
We'll just splash right in. And
we'll have you back.
Dash right in, and you guys, we can do more. Okay, so I'll share the screen, and I'll start with some primitive stuff. Now, just as a preview, what I don't have, but I can find somewhere, is the classic, I don't know, 8, 10, 12, depends on who you ask, steps of alchemy that start with something like dissolution and rotting and go through various stages of recrystallization, calcination, and then regeneration back up again into a solid new solid being.
Okay, you just described it. Thank you.
Yes,
we're good.
There are varieties, and all of them are good. They kind of, they fit to different purposes. I'm not going to have that. I hope I'm not disappointing too many people with that, but they're easy to find. And
I'm okay.
Glad to hear. Okay, what I'm going to do instead is show you my version of the history as I see it, which is to say.
Oh, and start with Plato, of course.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why I'm starting with Plato, and I won't go through every one of these slides, although let me see if I can make this into a slideshow.
Yeah.
There we go. I think, this is one. Okay.
There we go.
So this is part of a different presentation, but parts of it work really well here. And the part that I'm really interested in is that he begins with this idea that the macrocosmos, the world of the planets, and then the material world of different elements are tightly connected in this mathematical web, which is also kind of a musical web. It's a set of mathematical / musical harmonies that hold these things together. And he says that, and he presents it in different ways. I'm not going to go through any of these details. Oops, here we go. I'm going the wrong direction because my mouse is upside down, but here we go. So, he starts out oddly with the very first words. He says, 1, 2, 3, but where is the fourth? That's the beginning of his dialogue on the cosmos, the Timaeus, and the mysterious fourth that Jung talks about, that others talk about, the fourth part of the Trinity. All of these things are kind of like built in, like he's just giving you a little teaser without explaining it in the first line. And then we find later, pardon me, we find later that he has these 4 elements. 3 of them are interconvertible mathematically, like their equations, the equations of their shapes totally match, they're totally commensurable. But the 4th one, the Earth, doesn't fit in that scheme. It has its own dimensions. So the triangles that compose the cube don't actually go together in a tiling kind of way with the triangles that compose the other elements. So jumping ahead, and I can show you this down here. These are the elements of which the material world is made. Here, the lower one, this is a tetrahedron. That's the geometric form of fire. And he's very explicit that, there was earth, air, fire, and water, but then when the creator, who he calls an artisan, the artist, creates the world, the creator sets geometric form, number, to all of these elements that had already been there. And each one gets its own internal equation. Heisenberg, Schrodinger, they read Plato and they say, explicitly, Heisenberg says that Plato's doing early quantum theory, because these are quanta. They're only certain allowable geometric forms that have this regular solid shape and nothing in between. And you can convert them from one to the other. You can kind of connect them to each other, but there are very strict rules that allow or disallow things.
So it is important to understand that this was the basis for those earliest alchemists and scientists of any stripe. This was the basis of, this is what they drew from. They didn't have modern body of knowledge. They had this. So you have to understand this to understand them. But I did not know that this applied to what to modern. It also applies to the modern. So they were on target. And what does this also have to do with the shape of the molecules and how the molecules combine? Are these the same relationships? Because so molecule one to the other, are they also following these geometric forms?
Yes.
Is that what they're talking about? Okay, so wow.
It's much more complex, but I want to emphasize this point that the form of thinking is what Heisenberg identified, and that form is that there are there's a congruence of mathematics to
natural
reality,
law,
natural to natural forms, to material objects, but also that that there are rules that are based in the mathematics that allow for some things and disallow for other things, which puts a limitation on possibility. But within those limitations, lots and lots and lots of things can happen. And those limitations are defined well mathematically. They're not the same ones at every level, but there are mathematical forms that apply to and limit interaction at every level, and those can be found out. And they're in the form of harmonics. They're in the form of least possible this or most possible that. And cybernetics and other many scientists have noticed that laws that go to the limits, that is to say, the law of least action, they tend toward maxima or minima of a certain value. And
interesting.
All of our most basic laws of physics are those things that define maxima or minima, or the tendency to move toward a maximum or a minimum. So light will go through.
The universe has constraints. And are
Exactly.
we breaking those constraints? Is that why we are in so much trouble today?
Well, we can't break them.
Found ways to break them? Or
we can't break them. No, I think what happens is
immutable laws. Okay.
I think there are, like the mathematics here, you can't make the triangle have more than 180 degrees when you add the internal angles up, unless you curve space. I know, but then even there, you have limits in the curved space. So you can't actually break anything.
I feel good that there's immutable laws that we cannot break within the universe. I like that. I feel comfortable in that. Yeah.
Exactly. And we should. But then there's this other part that's discomfortable, and that is that they allow for a lot of possible combinations, and not all of them are good for people. Not all of them are good for every organism, for every situation, which is to say, they can combine and make lots of different kinds of molecules. But whether that's going to go with this particular physiology or not, no, it's not sort of, it's kind of like a ontological or a physical version of the question of evil. Why does evil exist in the world? It has to do with freedom. In a sense, these things are possible, but then choices still have to be made, and the moral responsibility for making choice is what sort of makes you prefer.
It gets right down into philosophy. So there's a set of laws for the universe, and there's a set of laws for Earth, right? And so what Earth says, oh, this is how life fits together and does well, right? So
yeah, exactly. So this planet evolves this way. Maybe other planets, other chemistries work there. Certainly this one works out pretty well. There's a lot of systematic connection between things such that entire ecologies can evolve from the presence of water.
And we're back into exoplanets. Tony would be happy.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Let's go back to your slideshow.
Yeah. So, okay. So the slideshow part here. So these are the elements, and then the dodecahedron. So these are the four. This is Earth.
Fire.
Water, and this is air. And so this thing here, the fifth one, is what Plato calls the shape of the cosmos. There's 12 faces to it where you can put the signs of the zodiac. Now, this is an odd thing for a guy who sets up a system out of which astrology has a rational structure. He was saying like, don't get too carried away with the astrology. Don't be scared of like things in the sky when you can do math. So just chill out and do the math. But he did set up a system where you can actually do some really intense archetypal astrology. And I'll get into that, and that connects back to the alchemy. So here this thing is the shape of the universe as a whole. And Kepler, later, this is Kepler's diagram, when he kind of put the math of how the universe could be heliocentric, he worked with Plato's solids. And he was convinced that something, and he went through something like 32 or 3 or 4 or 5 hypotheses of how to put together these different geometric forms such that they could line up with the orbits of the planets at which these planets were moving that were observed for a long time but weren't explained well. And he finally got a set that worked for him, and he published his book, The Harmony of the Worlds, I think is the English translation of it. And that is another one of those bizarre things. The form of thought that he had, even though he didn't have force to explain why it worked, he could explain the configuration very well with this simple mathematics. And the form of thought that somehow the macro and the micro should match, that's the thing, that's the source of a lot of insight. That's the thing that Plato does, that Kepler does, that I think we could do if we then think about things in a sort of more ecological way of tying things together, a restorative, a recirculatory picture of the world, and then go do the chemistry. So green chemistry has this problem that, we can replace one thing after another, one chemical that's toxic but performs a function. We can get another chemical to perform that function but not be toxic. That's the essence of green chemistry. It's wonderful, but when you go one by one, it's going to take forever. But and we should do that. But then on the other hand, if you alter the sort of whole frame of how you do it, then you kind of get at something more systemic. And I guess that's where the hope lies, in sort of the more Gaia-oriented mode. So back to the slideshow. That was a kind of a footnote. Back to the slideshow. What Plato does is he does set the planets on a course. I don't think I have an image for this, but he sets the planets on a course around the universe, and he says, "You planetary gods," the artist says to the artisan, cosmic artisan says to the planets, "I made you, now you make the rest of the world. I'm going to take hands off because anything I do will just make more of you. It's your turn to make the next level down, go for it." And so here the planets then, because of their mathematically defined orbits, each one is kind of weaving, if you can imagine each planet having a series of threads touching every atom in the universe, every atom of earth, air, fire, and water. And every time the planet moves, it's kind of pulling these things with it in a very regular pattern. And then you have the other 6 visible planets doing the same thing. You have over time this big crochet weaving project of different forms shaping up based on the movement of these regularities up above and these regularities down below. And this is, like I said, sort of the rationalistic basis for astrology, but it also becomes a basis for alchemy in the sense that every planet has metals attached to it. The symbolism of Mars as iron, Venus as copper, that kind of stuff goes into that. So when the alchemist sets down to do some work in a vase, and they're combining these different qualities, these different colors, they're attached somehow to the cosmic picture of the universe. And they're working the cosmos as well as working the little microcosmos of their flask. And they're cognizant of that fact. And that puts them in a frame of mind that is, again, reflective of their interior world, which is also a combination of different qualities. The planets are not only metals, they're also personality traits. They're aggressive, affectionate, sanguine, all these different kinds of things, all the different systems of ancient and medieval medicine that we know were connected to this world picture and connected to the world of the alchemists.
Interesting.
So there's a little bit of math. I won't go into the golden section. Okay, I have to say something. The proportion between the 3 elements here, those quick interchanges of the unit triangles that make them up, are defined nicely by the golden ratio. So you can do a lot with that. He alludes to it. Pythagoras knew it. Other people knew it. And so it's musical. And this is good old Da Vinci's version of it, and so on. But that's all mathematical. On the alchemical side, the sort of qualitative experiential side, you have pictures like this from Flood, which show that the universal harmony kind of settles out into these different sections of the universe, which also settle out into different sections of the universe that is the human body. And they strove to figure out how these things work. Now, not every one of them is absolutely correct. It shouldn't be taken literally, but the fact that there's connection should be taken seriously. And so various versions of this have been played out. And we see this again with different medicines we get from the earth affecting different parts of the body, and how this all works. It's not quite as neat and simple, but I think, old Plato put it out there like, here's a version, and things can work like this, get busy, basically. He said, this is a likely story, but I'm sure other people will have better likely stories later. That's it. And so he backs off. And so alchemists try one version after another version after another, and the marvelous sort of variety of possible combinations and shapes, it's pretty much infinite. And so alchemy doesn't finish its job. There is no final answer to the question, but there's lots of ways of posing it and possible ways of pulling it out. Let's see, I think I'm done with this slideshow. We should go to a different one. So let's look at a couple of classic alchemy images here. So jumping straight into the sacred marriage part, the union of opposites, so dramatically experienced by every person who is in a relationship or has been in a relationship, knows the difficulties of the work and the potential rewards and the pain that it takes to bring opposites together. This is one in a series. I think I have another one that there's a series of images of which this one and the one before it are parts. And it starts out with the king and queen separate, sun and moon, and then they join in various ways. And in this one, they have wings. In the previous images, they don't have wings. There's something like 20 or 30 of these images. And they go in kind of linear order, but not completely. And as they merge, they sort of start to change. And as they change, they become something else. And finally, they give birth to a baby, well, a new person, a new way of being human. They result in something that's more than and different than the two of them. And so you saw in that previous images, they're naked. And here, they're not naked. These things are similar. They read each other's work. People tried variations. Again, each person each author giving rise to another variation on these images makes it so that people want to dismiss the whole thing as a bunch of phantasmagoria. But on the other hand, it kind of attests to the individual sort of task, the task that each person has to take, and it has variations in it. But beneath all these variations,
serpents, the plethora of serpents here with little headpieces, and what that symbolized for the alchemists.
As not an expert on alchemy,
okay.
I'll say.
And maybe it's relationship to the caduceus of medicine, or
absolutely. So there you have the intertwining serpents, and then they're looking at each other at the top, and there's the central pole. It's kind of like the kundalini between them, and they're ascending. So I think the symbol of the serpent is that it's kind of like the lowest form. And we're going to biblical imagery, has to slither around, has no legs, it's on the lowest form. It's the lowest form that then evolves into higher forms. It sprouts wings. So the winged serpent that you mentioned on yesterday, actually, the winged serpent is an evolved form of the serpent. The serpent with a crown, which you see here, is an evolved form. These three here are three separate tendencies, three separate energies in the body. They could stand also, they have been made to stand for mercury, sulfur, and salt, but these also stand for different aspects of human energy that need to be combined and integrated. And here on the other hand, you see the green snake, which is sort of the combination of them, but it's still green, it needs to ripen. I mean, you get a plethora of images within each text. They work them so you get from something more basic and simple and undifferentiated to something that goes through a series of differentiations and becomes the gold. And how that's represented varies quite a bit from one text to another, but there are a lot of similarities. This is something that AI could pull out, thematic similarities that we don't immediately see, but then it puts them together and says, here, what do you think? And gives it back to us for further examination. But like I say, the variety
looks like photosynthesis was being described by the stalk of yellow multi-blossom flowers. So
yes, there's so many in each image. There's so many parts to each image. You could spend, and you're meant to. These are meditation images. You're meant to be there with that.
And these were some of these concepts just coming in, and so they were using these symbols to describe something maybe intuitive almost as well.
Well, that's the thing. Now we're back to that question of internal and external. Mm-hmm. And I think the objection that modern scholars have to taking Jung seriously, to taking Carl Jung's idea of alchemy seriously, and footnote, alchemy was taken seriously by Jung very early, much earlier than academic thinking and psychology had done before. And he went after it in a big way. So he contributed a huge chunk to the history of our understanding of alchemy. And so that is why the modern people with historical technique, Jung was never pretending to be a historian. So like, let him off the hook for that. But the modern people who are historians, who have technique, who look at texts in very specific ways, who have all kinds of ways of rationally sorting out works of the past, they look at this stuff and they find that some of it is allegorical to the point that you can take an entire text, which Newton did, translate it into laboratory equipment and laboratory processes and substances, and then come out with a product at the end. And so William Newman and other people see like, gee, I wonder if that's going on in other people and other places. And then so they do an exhaustive study and they see in some cases it is. And this, to them, they believe this gives them the justification to dismiss other interpretations of alchemy and keep that separation between spiritual and physical nice and tight, as academics like to do. And this is where I get kind of like, but wait a minute, let's go back and take stock of this and think about it. So here's their objection. They say that Jung's explanation is when early alchemists looked at matter, they had no idea what it was. When they made a new substance and just popped up in the flask or in the lab, they didn't know what this was. They had no instruction manual. No one else knew what it was. What are they going to do? Naturally, they're going to project whatever is in their minds onto the substance and then work with it as a mirror to kind of figure it out. And then some of them become savvy to the process that they're actually working out something on both ends, which, you're back to Plato and the old philosophers again. And they become savvy to that and they work it. Other ones don't. They just kind of like go after it and they still come up with really brilliant, interesting inventions with the stuff itself. But for us to simply dismiss all of that and say, projection isn't a thing, projection isn't real, what does projection even mean? Which is what they say in these scholarly articles. It's a little bit, it requires explanation. And so that's kind of work that I'm trying to figure out a way to bring back these sort of opposite ways of seeing alchemy and say there's something interesting here as well.
Can we have multiple languages to address the complexity of the issue? Yeah,
absolutely. That is the key. We need different inquiry strategies, different terminologies, because this is a very complex world and we are very complex objects in it.
Yeah. And why not go all the above as opposed to this or that?
Yes, so, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see. What can I show you? And please interrupt me as we go. Here's a beautiful image that kind of ties together a lot of macro and micro. And I'll zoom into certain parts. But here you can see when alchemy gets to Europe and really becomes popular, it merges handily with Christianity, which, by the way, as Christianity was forming back in the old days, alchemy was there too. So there's a lot of alchemy already in Christianity, but it gets amplified in the 15th, 16th, 17th century quite a lot. So if you look at different parts of this picture, and I'll try to zoom in a little bit more, you see there's the hand of God. So here comes the boss with the rules, and they're ironclad. There's the chain, hand of God, and this is Sophia, wisdom, and she's bound by these divine laws. And
glad
she's
somebody's at home.
Yeah, right. Yeah, lights on. Somebody is home. So she's feeding the world with her wisdom, and her entire being is there above it all, really. And then her hand is holding a chain, And this ape, this is us, the ape of God or the ape of wisdom. We're aping, we're trying, we're mimicking. In Plato's world, everything is an image of some higher forms. The forms, like the archetypes of Jung, they don't have a shape and color. They are sort of ways that things go together. It's kind of like a systemic interconnection of possibilities, the ideal set of possibilities. Easiest to think of that in terms of math. What are the things that can mathematically hook up? So this world is an image of that. It's not perfectly mathematical. There's dirt, there's grimy edges, and there's, like the points get rounded after a while. Yeah. So here we are down here. What are we doing? I'll zoom into the little ape. A little self-portrait here. Oops, sorry. Let's see. There's a religious world, all those angels, potential new babies there. I don't know the full interpretation.
That's where they
come from. They fall into cabbage leaves and into the mouths of storks this way. So here we are, and there we are. So this image, she is standing on the world. There's various versions of this: 1 foot on the land, 1 foot on the water. Really, I'm not going to go into that because I don't understand it well enough, but I will go down to the ape who has a compass and a globe and is trying to figure out everything. There's arithmetic. So there's music, geometry. There's all the sciences and crafts and animals and different substances and different mineral, vegetable, animal, different elements and so forth. And there's the spheres of the planets. And this is an attempt by Robert Flood to put everything into a picture.
Mm-hmm.
The first attempt at the unified field theory.
Yes, exactly. And it's kind of an interesting image, and not the only one. There are many, many ones like this. And I think the purpose of trying to pull everything together is healthy, but it must necessarily fail. Iterations are necessary for this to actually, get better. So our version of it is good. I think it's great that we are thinking ecologically now, but again, not fully complete yet. Let's see, do I have anything else to show? And I could stop anywhere and actually tune in on things that people want to know about more. This is a really fundamental image as well, the dragon or the snake biting its own tail, the Ouroboros. This is that idea of ultimate circulation, of the whole thing is one. It has a beginning and the end, but the beginning and the end are joined in one moment. This particular serpent has wings, so it's evolved compared to the ones that don't, but the very primitive ones, I think I have another here.
Well, the Ouroboros is still a very useful metaphor in science. So
yeah, exactly. The benzene ring. I think of the entire universe as one gigantic Ouroboros.
Me too.
So, and it brings back that alchemical idea that this
one
is
cauldron, one womb. Yeah,
one big cauldron. I can take a break here and just take questions at all.
Yeah, let's take some questions. Put your hand up. And
I would like you to go back to the image of the stiffened music of the Russian church. I have a particular fascination with that.
Yeah, let me change my screen.
And the source of that.
Yeah, I believe this is from a book called The Power of Limits.
Oh,
and
Georgie Dozy. I have that.
That's it. Thank
beautiful
you. Yes.
book.
Georgie Dozy.
We actually interviewed him before he died.
Oh, did you?
He was a Seattleite. Yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's it. He basically took the mathematics of the golden mean, the golden proportion, the phi number that I have up here. Let's see, back here.
Relates it to the human body and.
That's right. They fit to the human body. And then if you play with it, if you play with phi squared or phi divided by 1 over phi and 1 over 2 phi and all these things, if you try that out, you get to unlock some of the proportions among classical architecture. And so this was one exercise. It's not very clear, but these are different powers of phi, and they fit together into this pattern.
What on earth is he thinking in terms of music?
It's because the golden proportion also has musical counterparts. And so that's what he's thinking of. And stiffened, as in this this thing here, if you vibrate a metal plate with sand on it, you get different patterns forming. And this is kind of like the stiffened vibrations that fall into some standing wave, which is kind of like a semi-permanent holding of a pattern in physical form. It reminds me of the Hindu idea that the universe is made of the vibrations of Om, and the Om just kind of settles out into a bunch of different shapes, and it's solidified music. It's kind of, well, it's what string theory kind of proposes. That's what really those 4 elements as geometric forms propose as well.
You mentioned, this article mentions Hans Jenny's book, Cymatics, and Jeff Volk is going to be coming out with a new edition of that, or another series. They're all sold out in the world. Yeah. And he'll be joining us in future.
Yeah, he's already committed. So, good.
Yeah, he's given us many on cymatics.
Thank you.
I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Finish your sentence. I'm sorry.
Not at all. I think I was done.
I think Tony Hall had also asked a question earlier in the same category of images. He said, can we see the golden section in math for a few more moments? Okay. Tony, do you want to just turn on your mic?
And thank you, Dory.
Yeah, sure. I'm guilty of yes, of doing some capture of these things, which I put with my notes.
Please. By all means.
And we had it earlier for about a millisecond, and I was not able to catch this, and I think 2 earlier I was not able to catch. Yeah, that was basically my question, trying to absorb this. I mean, it's always fascinating, and I love seeing different diagrams of this, and the manifestation of how this applies to architecture you just talked about, I think is marvelous. Is it still being done?
I think so. It's I haven't looked for an update to see. I think the last gigantic version of this that I know of was Le Corbusier, the architect that made the United Nations building.
Yes.
Yeah.
He did that deliberately on golden proportions throughout the building. It's very.
I'm sure it's taught I know it's taught in art schools, and I suspect, or I'm pretty sure it's taught in architecture schools. I was just wondering to what extent it was being done and what extent it was understood why one would do this.
Yeah, and I don't know.
What it means.
What Templar
is the
chapels
aesthetic translation versus the underlying meaning?
Yes, the meaning. So the meaning. So you've hit something here that's difficult. We can have math. I go back to old Plato again. He presents the math and it's all there, but then it's not enough. He calls this the instrumental cause, or the secondary or the cooperative causes of the world. The primary cause is purpose and reason. He identifies that. That's where value and meaning live. And he separates these as 2 different kinds of causes. Mm. And then he says they have to cooperate with each other. So there's some necessity, there's mathematical necessity built in to these dimensions. There's mathematical necessity built into the 5 regular solids that I showed you regarding the elements. They just have to be exactly what they are. And then there's necessity built into material. Wood can't melt. There's things that you can't do with matter. It just is. So those necessities are the limiting factors that reason, that value has to work with, and the cooperation between those causes of things, the reasons for things, and the necessities of how things have to be, for him, have to work out the best deal they can, which is not, perfect. Mm. But so does this have meaning in itself? I don't know that can make sense. Is it preferable aesthetically? Does it have versatility to it that's amazing? Yes. And there's other mathematical forms that have that. Is there a meaning to that? I don't think it can be extracted from this. It's like if you keep going with equation after equation, and the sum total of them will not be meaning necessarily. That has to come from a different kind of inquiry and a different kind of language. But the fact that they can have anything to do with each other and connect, these later slides that show the embodiment of these 5 proportions in artwork that was not built on purpose in this fashion. It's just sort of an aesthetic preference that people have displayed in their works of art as seemingly right. Does that mean something? I guess it means that we have that our aesthetics, our human sensibilities do match up with some aspects of mathematical reality, but I mean, that's as best I can do on that.
Well, my curiosity jumps right in on this. And we have these proportions and well known to be part of the beauty of the classical age. And you mentioned Corbusier and the United Nations and other things of this nature. I'm just wondering, is this pan-cultural? Would this be seen by Aboriginal people in the same way it would be seen by scientists and artists of this day? What would happen if we did an experiment and we had 2 pieces of art, one exactly on the golden proportions and the other off by 10%, let's say? Would there be a preference that most people would see? Has this experiment ever been done?
Well, I can cite a bird bone flute of 40,000 years ago that has holes placed so that our current musical scale, which is mathematically based on this golden means. So even their ears of those Homo sapiens, right, of the Aurignacian, Gravidian cultures preferred that scale. So I think that is built into us.
Which scale is this? We have so many musicals. We have musical scales from different parts of the world.
You're talking about.
One is dissonant to the other.
Drill down into that. Let's look into this a little bit more deeply.
Right, but Tony brings up a good question, and that is that with that variation, would that variation bring out a different reaction, a different experience by simply just changing it? You know,
let's get some musicologists on here. Maybe you've done this experiment. That's an intriguing question.
And even the slide you have on screen now with the Eskimo blanket, the Inuit blanket, and the proportions and design, this is fascinating to me. So this also is reflecting the same?
Yes, I would, and in response to Tony too, I would say that there's some variation would be, not perceivable or not important, but after a certain point, it makes a difference. And this is again from Giorgio's book that he did these analyses, and they're close. I don't think they're exactly perfect, nor do they have to be that precise to elicit an aesthetic response. But there are limits if you double, I don't know, if you go beyond 10%, 20%. And that is a good empirical question, though, and it'd be an interesting study to put together.
We can also
in music, if you go just a little bit outside the tonal range,
yes, you're right.
It's very annoying to people brought up in culture A or culture B.
That's true.
So this it sounds interesting. The limits may not be that large, and also there is a certain propensity for randomness to give us these as we look at things like Eskimo blankets. I don't know whether all Eskimo blankets show the same proportions.
No, exactly.
Maybe they do. It's just to me it's a fascinating question that there are many examples found. But the examples that are not quite exact, are they there? Yes. And are these regarded to be lesser art or less appealing?
Interesting. Yeah. All this.
So nature has her palette and her rule set.
And here we have insects. I love this idea. I'm fascinated. But this is my nasty scientist.
Oh, yes.
Let's test it.
Yes.
Test it. Yeah.
So as you build those objects in space, Tony, maybe there are some advantages to putting them in the golden mean proportions. Maybe they're
perhaps we will with the next great telescope.
Yeah. That'd be fabulous.
I want to just say it's a question that we can ask for David Elkington when he shows up next month to talk about Western mysteries, because he can tell us about Templar chapels that were built intentionally in sacred means proportions because it had to do with the acoustics of the music that was sung inside,
right,
they felt that it resonated better. And in fact, we partook of an experiment where a sound engineer measured the distances and was talking about the pink line and the white noise and this noise and how the sounds actually chopped up in a way for our ears that sounded better. He can explain that better, but also that they were embedding hollow pots in these 8-foot thick walls to help amp up
the resonance, right?
So they knew a lot about how to make what they do sound better, look better, harmonize.
I'll just say this, and then we should go to Julie's question. There is a book that just came out. I learned about it in Amsterdam this summer. It's called Resonance. It's written by an engineer who turned design professor in somewhere in the Netherlands, I think Utrecht. Anyway, so it had been on his mind. It's kind of reminiscent of Tyler's kind of stuff as well. And he just looked for the concept of resonance in every possible place he could find it.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Something to look at. Yeah, let's hear.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah.
Oh, hi there. Actually, it's not really a question. It's just that in look, you can see there.
Yeah.
The exact replica of the one you have, but underneath it describes all the elements. It's in Jung's alchemical studies, but it describes what each of the elements in the picture just is. Basically, it's quite useful. It's a good book. I'm sure you've probably got it. The other book that you may not have is actually called the Book of Lambspring. I don't know if you've seen it. And it has in it it has lots of lovely pictures, but it's an ancient text that's been reproduced. And it actually describes the creation of the philosopher's stone, basically in all its steps. But it's a beautiful book. But I don't know how easy it is to get. I've had this on for 50 years.
Yeah.
In fact, I bought it in 1972.
Lovely.
And you have it in your hands? Can you show it to us?
Oh, the book is called The Book of Lambspring, so it's easier to do the inside bit. It's called The Book of Lambspring.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful book, but it does give you all those steps that you said you hadn't actually done. So
yeah.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this.
Thank you. Yeah. If you're in New York or anywhere that has a Jungian society, their libraries try to collect as many of these classic alchemy texts as possible that have been published at some time or another. And they're a great place to go through these. And again, it's interesting how many variations there are. There's similarities and there's differences between, say, Lambsprings and then who are the other really famous ones? I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but several of them pretty much in the same kind of 100, 200-year period in the 16th, 17th century produced beautiful versions of these. Sometimes the author is the artist, sometimes they commission artists. I have some images from Jakob Böhme, which are also brilliant and wonderful. And it's you can say they disagree, like this one puts this step before that step, and or this one starts from dark and light instead of starting from something else, from chaos or whatever. But I think it's not the right approach to look for the one alchemical text that is the right one, and that the beauty of the variation allows for personal experience, and I think that's what it's aimed at. And some of them are so good, like Michael Myers' Atalanta Fugians, wonderful. I mean, it draws you in, like Lambspring's images, the artist, and then the words, they go together in ways that really stop you and make you meditate on what do you think this could possibly mean. It kind of suspends you among different ways of thinking and seeing. That is the purpose. And the alteration of your consciousness makes it possible then to see things in the text that you hadn't. So you really do have to kind of go through slowly, and each one is its own journey in a way.
Yeah.
You're describing we are the cauldron, and the alchemical transformation, regeneration happens like right here. That's what you're describing.
Yeah, I like the fact that this one tells you that it's bringing together two bodies and then saturating them with soul and spirit to make them one. Basically, I love that image. That actually it's a saturation. Yeah.
Julie, anyway, we'll have to put this practice of ours into this whole mix, won't we? Yeah, exactly what happens.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Yeah, very insightful. Yeah.
Oh, tell us about the Philosopher's Stone. And how, and your comments on J.K. Rowling using all of this, weaving it into this beautiful fictional story and the popularity of it. I mean, is this not another chance for the Philosopher's Stone and the Phoenix rising and all of that Western lore in a fictional way, as they quote children's books? I mean, isn't that another way for it to reiterate itself and become known, and look at the embrace of it and the popularity of it? So what are your thoughts on this, popular kind of version of it?
The Philosopher's Stone, yeah?
I'm talking about Harry Potter and the whole series.
Oh, Harry Potter, I'm sorry. That Philosopher's Stone.
Both.
Yeah, I mean, both. I mean, what is the Philosopher's Stone, and why do you think Harry Potter's universe, embracing all of this old lore, became so popular? Because it resonated with us and this
some deeper
need to know. And by the way, I also want to ask our Mesoamerican expert if there's any correlation in Mesoamerica to all this, because I suspect there is. But go ahead until she wants to.
Just quick, and then I want to hear that too. I'm not aware.
Me too. Yeah.
I think our inner lives are so deep and rich, and the extent to which it seems like the commercial industrial world is more and more secular or soulless, that kind of has been compensated by all of these fantasy movies and the desire for them. The way we can readily take those in and enjoy them indicates that there's that depth here. It's not going away. And so,
and also it's articulating something within us as well. So it's just there. And if science won't embrace it, then let's bypass science and go to fiction, go to fantasy, go to literature, go to the arts.
I think so. And regarding alchemical works in other continents, this China through Europe axis is huge, and it captures parts of North Africa as well. I mean, all of North Africa. And
Egypt.
then, what about the rest of the world? What about the rest of Africa? What about South America, North America? And I'm not aware, but I'm sure that the thing is that they have worked with
some of these same ideas,
created things. Exactly what those records are, that's something that has not, to my knowledge, been done. But if anyone else knows about alchemy
well, tell us about the origins in Egypt. I mean, you're citing that that's one of the first expressions or texts with some of these ideas.
Yeah. This is all I know. Again, not the expert on this at all, but a lot of alchemy had to do with altering appearance. So it comes in from making something look like it's gold, or making something redder or whiter, or making something shiny. And these alterations, it's kind of like the concept of magic in the ancient and medieval world. It is the entire spectrum. It starts with this sort of like stage magic-y things where you're working with appearance alone, and that's all you're doing, and you know it. And you're also there to kind of raise that fascination level in your audience and yourself. And then it kind of, it goes from there to actual constructing new things, new substances that have new powers that, are not appearances, they actually transform. And then it goes from that to doing sort of the cosmic magic, where you're trying to draw down the powers of the celestial spheres of the different planets with substances that correspond to them, and do the whole sort of sympathetic magic thing that was very big throughout Europe and earlier in the Middle East and elsewhere and into India and so forth. And that is a different kind of magic as well. And then finally you get to, not finally, but then there's the other extreme of it where it's just like it's purely internal stuff. And there's this axis that develops, I think, as far as I understand, the first sort of full-blown version of it, imperial magic, comes out in the Middle East and then gets up about the same time to John Dee and to Elizabeth, this idea that the entire world can be transformed with magic. And imperial magic is the magic of remaking the world, you know, the new order of the ages, to make the world into this new entity, deliberately and consciously. And John Dee, as you may or may not know, was the court magician of Elizabeth, who did do a lot of this stuff explicitly as magic. So that's the whole spectrum. It starts with this appearance stuff that makes you feel fascinated and looks good, and you can change the look and color of things, all the way over to this world-shifting idea of magic that was born somewhere in the, I want to say, in the 14th, 15th century, and then kind of like actually becomes real with the British Empire at some point.
And becomes of interest to emperors and kings and political heads, right? Because their job is to oversee and transform the society and move it along, right? Exactly. So here's another tool.
Exactly. So not at the personal level, but at the collective social level, magic performed there.
So it's the full circle we're going on with a journey with you today. I mean, it's that idea that we're not just looking at something historically, we're talking about something ingrained within us now and into the future, and how that applies to our lives, our civilizations. I know Laurie Snyder asked a question or made a comment earlier in the chat room saying, reflecting on what's happening in the Middle East right now in this day where we have two separate communities sharing the same land, and what does that mean? But there's so many implications here. Where do you see all of this going, and what is your fascination going forward? Where do you really see yourself, following the threads of information regarding your research in alchemy?
Well, I would very much like to broaden the scope. So when people make comments in their scholarly work that says all of alchemy ... Oh, I forgot I have another presentation. I can show you little bits of that. I should do a quick zap of that too. When they say these things, they're not really thinking of all of alchemy. They're thinking of all of alchemy since, I don't know, 1500 in Europe. Mm-hmm. And they do acknowledge where parts of it come from, but there is no sort of acknowledgement of the literally mountainsides worth of text that are untranslated and unread, and how that might change the picture of what we believe alchemy is intrigues me to no end. So that's
can I add something here then? Mm-hmm. Because I would even see this whole philosophy present in the cave art
I was thinking that too.
Of France, sure. Right? And it's the only one I've seen really up close. But there's a couple of things. I mean, you mentioned sympathetic magic. So that idea of as above, so below. I can talk today, as above, so below. And that if you have a representation of something, because we experience that a lot. Here, I am a point here, but I am also a point for the cosmos. I can be in both places at once. Whatever is happening there is also happening right here for me. Right. And so to hold something, even in a representation, a picture, I think the magic is really in here with us and our consciousness to evoke that in the whole larger realm, that we can work something. There's a relationship, there's juice, there's agency, there's oomph, there's some relationship going on, there's fire going on. There's attention, right? There's that's kind of a magical power, and we need to direct that intelligently and intentionally. So I think even in the cave art, you can see that it's dismissed as a sympathetic magic. No, they weren't putting arrows in their representation of the animals. That's dismissed. I agree with that. That's not what they were doing. They were doing something more subtle, more profound, more intimate as a relationship, more holistic, more respectful, more majestic. And also, I just read an article where, surprise, so much of the art has to do with the contours of the cave wall and what would be suggested. And look at this idea that we see a shape in the cloud. They were seeing shapes in the stone. Well, duh. Right. That's how our brain works. Pattern recognition. It's built into us. Hello. Why is that a surprise? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that artistry? to see something suggested. And we saw that again and again. Oh, the mere suggestions of how the ropes of calcite were formed look like a mammoth, and all you have to do is add an eye and a little hump and it's a mammoth. That is sophistication. That is artistry. Look at Picasso and his bicycle wheel, handle and his handlebars. That's a cow. You call that art? Well, let's call what they were doing art.
Of course.
That's genius. That's that process within us that recognizes and creates, right? Duh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, why is that a revelation, or you didn't recognize that before? I don't know, but that's just the way we work. And I would say that this is the way we work in pattern, in metaphor, in mythopoetic language. Let's not take that away from human understanding, because that is subject and object having a relationship that's magical, that's transformative, that's regenerative. So can we please include the humanities and the sciences together, because both benefit from the relationship, and it's how we are constructed by this magnificent evolutionary process of the universe. So let's celebrate it and make the most of it and understand and see it. I guess that's where I'm like, yeah, we can take this process right back down to the earliest expressions of our species, and probably those that came before. So anyway, that's my pitch for magic.
That's so, I mean, you bring to mind the people from so long ago, and they're physically so much like us, and their emotional responses to the world and to each other so much like us. And so their most sort of I don't know, refined or abstract or just like way out there thoughts were also not wildly different. So when I hear all that, I think, people talk about metaphor as sparking creativity, and people talk about metaphor in science. It's got its second and third wind over the period of the last 50 years of people talking about it. Great, yes, everyone agrees metaphor enhances and sparks creativity. But I think they kind of go too micro on it often, where they think that, well, Kekulé looks at this and has this dream, and there's the benzene ring. Yeah, that's true. And somebody looks at whatever experiment they're doing and they think of something else, and it reminds them of something else, and bang, that's true for that experiment. And that's great. I love that stuff. Nothing wrong with it. But the scale of it is like one little thing after another. And I think we can do that same activity, but then expand it, like, again, Tom Berry and Brian Swim do, to the scope of the entire world, the system of the world, as I guess Newton called it, to think to think metaphorically at that largest scale in order to address these global issues like climate change. And politics for me, I avoided history and politics, and I went to science because they drove me crazy at a young age. I couldn't think of them without, going irrational in some way. And I'm still, after all these years, a little better at it, but not much more. But I think that if many of these global level problems were solved, it would have an effect on the political stuff. For example, water is one of the biggest problems in the Middle East as well as elsewhere. Water rights, disputes over water and land have been, with us. That's not an impossible problem to solve, and genius could be spent on that. And it's not about inventing a new molecule. It's not about splitting, some finer bit of matter into some finer bit of energy. And those things have taken sort of center stage as what it means to do science is to have very expensive projects that can be done to split very small bits of matter into very bits of energy. That all works, but I don't think that's the best way to do science. I think if you looked at it globally, there's other discoveries to be made with other forms of thought, which have to do with
beautifully said.
You talked about science and spirituality being split early on. Do you think if they hadn't been split, that if we had spirit and ecology and a little bit more heart and a little bit more holism, and we were responsible members of the web of life looking at as a whole, and we had a spiritual ethical duty to do well for a fellow man and all the fellow creatures and Earth herself, do you think that A, would have been possible, and B, what would the world look like today had those early philosophers, science and spirituality, maintained its direct relationship?
Yeah, I think you're talking about subordinating science to some value systems, or at least to value. Not necessarily the ultimate final system. That sounds like a theocracy, and that's not certainly what I intend. That's certainly not what Plato intended. He would have come out for a religion if he wanted.
Not what I'm talking about either. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But I think it's possible. I think it's to basically put that kind of creativity, scientific creativity, beneath something. Right now, it's beneath capital gain and profit, and it functions within a larger consumer capital system very well. I mean, very well in terms of it satisfies that system. So it already does exist subordinate to something, and it has freedom within that to do, interesting discoveries and so forth. But there's a lot of it that is serving just that other higher value, which is not a very good value. It's a very narrow kind of value. So it's not like we can't think of it or it hasn't been done. We're just not subordinating it to we're not sort of thinking about science as within some other value system that has nothing to do with
the human
experience. I'm not talking about a theocracy where one leader gets to proclaim, I'm the only one who hears God and I'll tell you what to do. But it should be self-evident for all of us, right? If all of us were developing our inner core, our interiority, along agreed upon values, and we'd all agree upon what is the right way to go about it. We celebrate Marcus Aurelius, right? He was a Stoic Roman emperor, one of the few good ones. And look at his philosophy of trying to do good, of trying to look for the good of all. And we celebrate that versus those emperors that were childish, hedonists, and psychopaths, right? Right. So we can all agree on what the values are. That
I think, and then going back to the values of the earth, I mean, it's kind of there in terms of how ecologies work, and all the parts work together. Looking at how fungi work, I mean, Merlin Sheldrake does a beautiful job of sort of displaying all of those connections and how fungi basically create communities. And I think the way he put it was, they can negotiate with anything. It's almost like they are transforming whatever they come across in a way that, like, hey, can we get along? How? And then they work out some chemistry between them. And they've been on the earth for billions of years. So
Mother Earth has got it down, hasn't she?
Exactly. And it all works good. So to study systems like that, to see how such negotiations happen, how communities are built, might have something to tell us about communities at our level, but it also does some good jobs in terms of healing this particular kind of toxic situation or that particular, material shortage problem. It has that immediate payoff as well. But as a
can we turn to nature and biomimicry, and can we learn her lessons, and can we apply them in our own technology? Can we be the good children that we should be to the Mother Earth?
Simple metaphor. Simple metaphor right there. Yeah.
And intellectual is one aspect of it, but the other part has to do just with that transformation of consciousness itself, maybe an alchemy of consciousness, where there's that universal growth as a civilization together, where we get past certain things. We see it happen in our generation, in our lifetime, significant shifts and changes in our perspective of the world and what's important and not important. Hopefully that evolution will continue, where these issues that we're talking about they're not separated. It's sort of,
that's why we're having this conversation today.
In an automobile, you don't separate the engine from the axle and the wheels, because otherwise the automobile won't work.
Broken vehicle.
Broken vehicle. So
you're thinking systemically. When you say that kind of stuff, you're thinking systemically. And if people would think long-term systemically, they would not do to each other what they do for the sake, for a stake in land or a property or a substance. And we do that because we don't think too many steps beyond our immediate need. Just go a decade or two out, or a few steps past.
Like our indigenous ancestors did. Hey, let's look at 7 generations. Let's look at the community as a whole. Well-being, right relation. Yeah, those are the goals here. Okay, practices. Did these ancient alchemists have any practices?
A secret society kind
for
of thing,
an interior transformation?
Yeah.
Well, I know a tiny bit about Chinese version of alchemy that does that beautifully. And this is what inspired Jung to look into European alchemy, was The Secret of the Golden Flower. That text, which his colleague Richard Wilhelm, I think, translated from Chinese to German back in the 20s, I believe, early 30s. He asked Jung to write a preface. He read it, blew his mind, and he thought, well, we can't just appropriate this because we're not Chinese. That's a whole culture sphere by itself. We probably have one here. He looked into European alchemy, boom. Right. But if we go back to that text, it does have very beautifully laid out poetically sort of stages like this that are no pictures, and there are some metaphors and some imagery, but they're not as complex as what we've seen in the European work that we were just looking at, which is beautifully deep and rich. But again, the distance between these two texts is, The Secret of the Golden Flower, I don't think it was written in ancient times. They were sort of like, uh-oh, we're losing our tradition. Let's compile it. If I understand it correctly from the most recent translator, Cleary, it's based on ancient texts, but it was put together more recently, maybe in the 16th, 17th century. In any case, it does correspond to all the old, to Tao Te Ching and all the older stuff. And it has beautiful, but as you read through it, you kind of start to experience the meditative states that they're trying to produce. So that's
this like a book I can order on Amazon, or?
Yeah, and the more recent translation of it is by Thomas Cleary. And he has a lot of great footnotes in there as well.
Interesting. Okay, we're interested in practices.
Yeah, and it's each, those are like 3-4 pages per chapter. It builds up to chapter 8, which is like almost 8 pages, and you read each line, and it's beautiful. It's about breath. It's very similar to doing things with the breath and visualization. And as they say something like, the eyes are the stars are the handles. No, the eyes are the handles to the stars, is a line that comes up in the first or second chapter. And I'm going like, you're just going to say that and keep and they do, but they come back to it a few times. That's turning the eyes around is another metaphor.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like, yeah.
Then halfway through, they say, oh, by the way, that stuff we said about, turning it in, that's for beginners. Now let's start to, so it kind of is intended in that manner.
Interesting.
And its simplicity shouldn't, there's more to it than what seems to be there, but no, I haven't actually, again, I've read it a lot and I really enjoy it and talk with students about it. But in terms of looking at all the scholarship around it and what people have said and how they've used it, I don't know. But to me, it appears like something that could be used very much like a systematic sort of progression of meditation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what would you say about our, what was the most surprising thing that you found in all of your deep research in alchemy?
Oh.
What did you not expect to see?
Well, I'll show you something immediate that I didn't expect to see, and I saw it yesterday when you did. So I was going to say that the community that you two produce, just in your activity, no matter whether there's 5 people or 50, ever over the years, is something really beautiful. It's like that fungal growth of getting into and altering people's minds and bringing them together. So yesterday when we did those trance postures, I saw this. I was looking for alchemical images, and in my book on alchemical images, I wasn't able to reproduce this before.
That's what you were describing in your experience.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's kind of like a mushroom in the way that it curls around.
Yeah.
And then there's the vortex in the middle that leads up to the sun. And when you read the caption for this, it's basically phases of the moon, finding out where the moon's going to be in the sky. But the form of it as you pan out is kind of the form that I experienced yesterday. That was surprising to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just surprising to me that I would have these experiences just from listening to a rattle and holding a posture with your guidance and, nothing else. And then these things just kind of come up. And the thing is, we've seen a lot of images in our lives. We're surrounded by images, but when they come up in you, full blown, and they affect you emotionally, and you're starting to undergo some reflection about, where am I? And you start to maybe get a deeper, other kinds of self-reflection happening. That to me is surprising, that it takes so little. It takes so little to just, it's like a mere puff would carry a downy feather and carry you really, really far. That is surprising to me. And it's kind of like the opposite of all of the intensity of images that could be there, is the gentleness of the power that can evoke them. That's surprising to me. And it's beautiful. I'm glad it works.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's all swirling within us, and what wants to,
all the time, right? All the time.
Yeah. That's why I think we call this the language of spirit. It's how it's communicated to us and through us. And of course, one to the other. And so all this symbology, mythology, metaphor, it's just our language.
We're always looking for ways to describe what's going on in the human experience. And today, with this discussion of alchemy, which I've never had this kind of depth of discussion previously, it's giving me a broader perspective, a newer vocabulary to understand the experiences that we have.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And how they've been with us through time. And so many practices to bring it up, call it forth, right? Yeah. It's just like all roads lead to this, it seems to me.
Yeah. Oh, I should say in connection with that often alchemy is grouped with the, in quotes, other occult sciences. And there's a huge amount of work. It's starting to get translated, fortunately, in Arabic and Persian and languages of the Middle East. There was a lot of interaction between Jewish, Christian, and Muslim experiences and texts and traditions. And they came together a lot. They went into each other's work a lot. And as these get translated, and the language back then was Arabic. I mean, Moses Maimonides, for example, wrote his philosophies, Jewish philosophy and theology in Arabic, because that was like Latin for that period. Went on for, I don't know, 800 years. So in any case, some of that stuff's being translated. And when you look at the works there, alchemy is one of the occult sciences, and it's connected with the other ones. And occult in the sense of not like bad or to be hidden, but just not obvious. It's hidden in that sense. But when you put it together, you see that they overlap quite a bit. And so, you can say alchemy is everything. Not exactly, but it's really connected parts of it to the other ones. And you can do things with geomancy that are connected with astrology, which is kind of like astrology on the ground. But then you get to parts of the ground and you're back into alchemy, or you're into some other form of sympathetic magic. And they were kind of associated. And the overall paradigm, I think, if you want to call it a paradigm, was that macro-micro.
Thank you for elucidating the big picture, because that's what I was referring to. And it's all one soup, right? Eventually. But also these early Arabs were doing robotics. They were building mechanical robotic thing. And I'm thinking, how early was that? And what would they say about looking at the rise of robots today? We're sending robots in to do jobs in nuclear power plants, and they're going to the moon, and they're going to space, and they're doing this and they're doing that. They're in the Amazon doing the shipping, right? Robots. Sure, yeah. So tell us about the quick history of robots.
I know only 2 points.
Okay, that's enough, because it's probably all we have time for anyway.
2 points to get a line, right? So Hero of Alexander, I think Greek, and way predates the Islamic stuff, but he did a lot of stuff with steam and cranks. And I think a lot of that was for amusement. I'm not sure, but then some of it was actually utilitarian. Also, I know, again, something I'm ignorant of and I need to look at more. The Chinese did a huge amount with technologies that were, again, gear related and systemic, and did have to do with measuring time and space, which there's technological ingenuity there. I don't know if there's robotics per se, but I suspect if we looked hard, we'd find some interesting things there as well. Then you get up to the modern age, somewhere around the early modern period in Europe. There's all these robots that play cards and ducks that eat and poop and things like that. And they're all for amusement. But I think the whole time in the back of the head, it was like, we can do more. The idea of sort of like transhuman, changing the human, the way we put apricots together with plums to get whatever we get when we put those together, kilowatts or something. That idea was also back then in this period. That one actually I learned from good old Carolyn Merchant, this wonderful book that captures a lot of the sense of what we're talking about here. It's now about 30 years old. It's a great book, but she cites someone from like, I think the 15 or 1600s who was talking about, we're inventing new fruit. We could do this with people. We could just basically transform what it is we are and become closer and closer to, at least farther from the animals and closer to God kinds of concepts. That preoccupation with self-transformation exteriorly is centuries and centuries old. And I think there is stuff back in the Greeks too. I can't remember. There's a citation I'll dig up and send to you. Well,
the Greeks are on a lot of this also. I mean, look at Plato and his philosophies really resonate so much with quantum physics. But Greece, the Antikythera mechanisms.
Oh yeah. That.
I mean, are we missing chapters? Because here we can find some artifacts that go, there's a story to this, that we're not seeing the connective tissue entirely, are we?
Yeah, I think we're only scratching the surface. Oh, speaking of scratching the surface, I want to share screen for just like a minute to show you a little data. I talked a lot about machine learning. I feel like if I don't show data, it'll sound like, well, he said he did something, but what did he do? And so this is a presentation of some of my results of looking at history through digital humanities. There's a little bit of the history of texts that show the increasing interest in it. The only other person I've ever seen do this, she published this in 2022, just as I was starting what I was doing. I got to meet her. She's a wonderful young postdoc doing the same kind of technique, but on a single author. Okay, so quickly going through this, a little bit of the history of the kinds of things that alchemy does here. All of these things were explored back in the day and passed on. Just so many things. Brewing, I didn't mention brewing, fermentation, so important. Let's see. Yeah, I already mentioned this, so let me jump ahead. There's a little back and forth between alchemy being disregarded as simple gold making and discredited in order to make hay out of chemistry, which they did. You know, alchemy is fraudulent chemistry became the song. And then you got a 19th century sort of backlash that, no, it's spiritual. And then so we got this sort of spiritual alchemy on steroids, kind of divorcing itself from the actual texts until those were dredged up, but then reinvigorating it with some spiritual energy of the transcendental movement and so forth. That brings us right into the 20th century. And then basically the spiritualists was saying something that they were ridiculed for, namely, alchemy is purely moral and spiritual discipline. Well, you know, in light of the fact that petroleum and pharmaceutical industries seem to lack some soul here, they were kind of right about that. And you know, that needs to be thought about in that way. They were prescient in that. In any case, what's quantifiable and what's not with machine learning was my question. So I'll jump to what is quantifiable. Can't talk about it as a whole, but let's talk about it, you know, locally, and some things we can ask about and answer. Let's see. Sorry, yeah, these are questions we could ask without translating everything. What are the numbers? How much do we have? Is the proportion of mystical to operational and material alchemy, does that fluctuate over time? Does it depend on what's happening? Is there a war or famine going on? Does it change from culture to culture? Does it change within a culture over time? These can be answered by translating just a very small number of words and phrases, and then doing a count up of what turns up and what patterns are recognized by the machine. So I did that, and I'll show you what, by the way, this is called distant reading versus close reading. You just kind of like, don't read anything, you just let the machine read everything and see what patterns it can find. This is a little methodology thing we don't need to worry about, but here's here are the graphs. So I wanted to see, what happened in the 17th century? Was there an increase in some way of thinking and not in others? So mercury, sulfur, and salt were always associated in the sort of metallurgical version of alchemy, and the principles, sort of theoretical alchemy, always had those together. So when I looked for those terms occurring together, like within a 10-word, 11-word string, I found that salt separated off after a while. And there was quite a lot more interest in salt than mercury and sulfur, which kind of stayed together.
Oh.
But salt took off. And the thing is that salt really refers to any mixture of substances, whether they have mercury or sulfur in them or not. So when it comes to
category.
Exactly, you're inventing new things. These are all salts, and people just went, really after and innovations of what became chemistry. Anyway, so these are some of the things I graphed. This is a pilot study, just 180 texts, and just for a short amount of time with some limited tools. The next phase, you can use bigger tools that don't involve me actually giving it any clues. I was looking for 3 principal alchemy, and I found that the co-occurrence of those 3 terms just basically dropped over the 100-year period. And yeah, this is not new. Everyone agrees that alchemy sort of took a dive in the 17th century, but exactly what the numbers are, that I haven't seen. And I think this maybe adds some information there that wasn't there before. And that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to take up any more time with technicalities, but there's the actual.
Oh, it's nice to see how you're drilling down into the statistics and the various approaches to the questions that you're posing and the answers that you're getting. So nobody's done this before, have they? This is
not that I know of.
Means to pull this kind of data out of the database.
Yeah, not that and I hope it catches on, because I'm taking 2 things that are not my specialty and making it my business.
Yeah,
yes, I've been doing that the whole time. So
I appreciate the highly nuanced and the broad perspective of what you've shared with us today.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, and what is the key question that you're trying to answer with this look at alchemy? What is it? What is driving this? Really?
Well, I think where our conversation has gone is when we talk about restoration, regeneration of the earth by thinking differently about it. I think that's where it's come back to. And I've met another colleague at NYU, Donna Bilak, who is all in on that. She worked with one text, and it kind of, as she says, when you read this, it transforms your mind and makes you ready to think other things in the text. So that happened to her, and she just kept it going. And then she got to this sort of environmental alchemy concept. And we started to share that in the last 2-3 months. So we're kind of teaming up to articulate the concept of environmental alchemy more, in hopes that it does reach that level of thinking, sort of like large scale thinking that uses the dynamics that and the emotion, the heart that's in alchemy, and then plays that out in engineering and scientific terms. And it's not like it can't be done. It's just we haven't done that. We could.
Isn't that a delicious moment, though, the aha experience, right?
Yes.
When things come, that's a beautiful moment. And it's really about our worldview, to deconstruct it and ask, the who are we, where do we come from, where are we going, what's going on? And then where is our new trajectory? What is the new story we can tell ourselves? So that over and over and over again seems to be our connection to all of our guests. Let's look at our worldview and ask these deep questions and just see where we're going, because all of us have a say. We're all stakeholders. We all have a say in our present and our future, and we all have an influence. So I think it ultimately is about that, isn't it?
It certainly is. Yeah. Thanks so much for the opportunity. You as conversation partners make a lot of this work. It'd be very frustrating if I had to just monologue this all the way through. I'd be like, it would get all.
You're very humble, but let's face it. I mean, your scholarship and the work that you're doing is just, I think, cutting edge and very important. And I want to
innovative and refreshing. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, there's a couple of comments in the chat room. I'll just end with here. Charlotte said the ultimate alchemy is making lemonade from lemons. We deal with day-to-day, moment to moment as individuals and groups, and ultimately the human race.
Thank you, Charlotte. Beautifully put.
The new frontier is moving humanity into harmony, but it begins within. The hardest alchemy problem is to solve. It's to solve our own, right? And then I'll scroll down. Let me see. I know that
Dory was citing some books.
Oh yeah, she mentioned that treatise on white magic. She was citing. Then down to Miriam, she said, let's see.
Oh, I wanted to finish, Charlotte. She says, I have a very old tapestry from India that sends me into trance just by looking at it.
Oh, wonderful.
It looks like this and is a doorway to perception using the bicameral mind. Two parts coming together for new magic.
That reminds me, I have something.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to go get something.
Yeah.
This is something that throws me into trance too. It's this old, let's see if I got it right side up. This is something that I need to share with my alchemist friends to help me interpret. This is something I got in a bazaar a long time ago. If you look up here to see the battle between the lion and the dragon, and then there's
serpent. Yeah.
There's helpers of the lion and there's helpers of the dragon, and I asked the guy what this is, and it's something that Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and others talk about when they talk about health and psychology and so forth 900 years ago. And it's basically the different, it's what became, I mean, in Jung, the different complexes that are running around in us, they're in conflict, and you can get them to team up and work out something together. And this is like one phase of the internal war, and, you know, the allies of the dragon and the allies of the lion, and, you know, kind of like, if you work this out. And so it's like a snapshot of that moment. And it's this fierce kind of like, it looks like something crazy is going on. But it was inside the mind of the guy who was basically making this with very primitive tools and just tapping away at this tray.
Wow. Deborah is a longtime teacher of our work, and she says, love having posture practice brought into the alchemical. Yeah, thank you. It certainly has transformed me, unified my brain hemispheres, and brought my body mind into communication with my head brain. Lovely, so full circle to this
quote unquote
conversation.
Quote unquote occult conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Susan said, I'm new here. I'm a visual artist. I appreciate I'm learning so much from this discussion. Very inspiring. Yeah, yeah. And then Dory says, when's Farzad coming back to do a presentation on spiritual geometry of the Persian art and architecture?
I know Dory and her husband Stephen went and looked at that culture extensively and were raving about the art, the abstract art. Yeah.
We definitely want to have you back, obviously.
You're a member of our community.
Yeah, we buzzed through in 2 hours what you spent a lifetime collecting. So yeah, wonderful.
I can see why you must be a very popular professor at NYU, and because you really empower and get into all these exciting ideas, and I can just imagine the discussions you have with all your students. So I'm glad you brought it here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.